Jack Parker drives his beat-up truck down a rainy highway, doing mental math about overdue bills, while his 8-year-old son's asthma medication sits like a ticking time bomb on the passenger seat. One more expense he can't afford. When he spots a rain-soaked woman on the roadside, his son's constant reminder to help others like Mom taught us echoes in his mind. He offers her a ride, never suspecting that Madison Williams just escaped her father's suffocating billion-dollar empire, or that her impromptu taste of freedom would change both their lives forever. As his kindness reveals a world she never knew existed, and her presence offers his family a chance they never dared dream of, one question remains. Can genuine love survive once the truth about her identity comes crashing down? This story proves that sometimes the richest moments in life come from the poorest decisions on paper. Before we dive deeper, what would you do if you discovered the stranger you helped was actually worth billions? And if you're not already following, don't miss what's coming next. This story is just getting started. The ancient alarm clock's buzz pierced the pre-dawn darkness, and Jack Parker's calloused hand silenced it before it could wake Tommy. He'd gotten home from his shift at Earl's Diner just 3 hours ago, but bills didn't pay themselves. The mirror revealed dark circles under his eyes that seemed to deepen with each passing day, but he managed to smile when he heard the soft padding of Tommy's feet approaching his door. "Dad?" Tommy's voice carried that slight wheeze that made Jack's heart clench. "Can we have pancakes?" "Sure can, buddy." Jack ruffled his son's unruly brown hair, so much like Sarah's it hurt sometimes. "But you've got to take your medicine first." In the kitchen's harsh fluorescent light, Jack studied the remaining pills in Tommy's inhaler while his son chatted about his upcoming science project. 3 days' worth, maybe 4 if they were careful. The prescription bottle on the counter mocked him with its $175 price tag, and the envelope tucked in his jacket pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. Final notice on rent, printed in angry red letters. "Dad, you're burning them!" Tommy's giggle pulled Jack back to reality, and he quickly flipped the slightly charred pancakes. Extra crispy, just how brave explorers like them, Jack recovered, earning another laugh from his son. These moments, Tommy's laughter, their shared breakfast, the way his boy's eyes lit up when talking about school, they made everything worth it. But the weight of responsibility crashed back as Tommy's laughter dissolved into a coughing fit. Jack was there instantly, rubbing circles on his back, helping him with the inhaler. Each labored breath was a reminder of his failures, of the specialist appointments they couldn't afford, of Sarah's absence when they needed her most. "I'm okay," Tommy wheezed, putting on a brave face that was too old for his 8 years. "Mum always said Parker men are tough." Jack swallowed hard, remembering Sarah's optimism even in her final days. "That we are, buddy, that we are." He checked his watch. "Time for another juggling act. Mrs. Henderson will be here in 10 minutes, remember? No running around outside. Use my inhaler if I need it, and do my homework before TV," Tommy recited, rolling his eyes good-naturedly. "I know, Dad." Jack grabbed his jacket, the eviction notice crinkling. 30 days to come up with 3 months' back rent, or they'd lose the only home Tommy had ever known. The home where Sarah's memory lived in every corner, where her garden still bloomed in the backyard, where Tommy could still point to the height marks on the door frame and tell stories about each measurement day. "Love you to the moon," Jack called their traditional goodbye. "And back times infinity," Tommy responded, just as his mother had taught him. In his truck, Jack allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of weakness. 30 seconds to let the fear show, to feel the crushing weight of single parenthood, to miss Sarah so fiercely it felt like a physical wound. Then he straightened up, started the engine, and headed to his first job of the day. Parker men were tough, after all. They had to be. Madison Williams stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of her father's penthouse office, the city lights of Manhattan twinkling like captured stars 50 stories below. The woman looking back at her was perfectly polished. Designer. Dress, impeccable makeup, not a strand of honey blonde hair out of place. A living, breathing corporate asset, just as her father had molded her to be. The merger with Sterling Industries is crucial, Madison. Richard Williams's voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed without question. Charles Sterling's son is a suitable match. Harvard Business School, impeccable family connections. You mean he's convenient? Madison cut in still, watching the city below. People looked like ants from up here, living their lives free from the suffocating expectations of billion-dollar empires. Just like the match set of fountain pens on your desk. Her father's sigh carried decades of practiced patience. You're 26, Madison. It's time to think about your future, about the legacy of Williams Corporation. Legacy. Everything in her life had been about the legacy. The private schools chosen for their networking potential, the carefully selected hobbies that would look good in society columns, the charity boards she sat on, each one strategically chosen to enhance the Williams brand. Even her college major had been decided in a board meeting before she'd turned 16. I've been thinking about my future. Madison turned to face her father. I want to work with our charitable foundation, make a real difference, not just pose for photos at galas. The foundation is a tax write-off, nothing more. Richard dismissed her with a wave of his manicured hand. You'll meet with Charles and his son for dinner tomorrow. Wear the blue Dior, it photographs well. Something snapped inside Madison. Years of silent compliance shattered like the crystal paperweight she'd given him last Christmas. I'm not a merger acquisition, Dad. I'm your daughter, who has enjoyed every privilege that position provides, he reminded her sharply. Your mother would have understood the importance of family duty. The mention of her mother, gone 16 years now, hit like a physical blow. Mom would have wanted me to be happy. Your mother was an idealist. Richard's voice softened with rare emotion. The world ate her alive. I won't let that happen to you. Madison watched her father return to his emails, the conversation clearly over in his mind. The same pattern they'd followed her entire life, his decisions, her compliance, all wrapped in the suffocating blanket of protective love. She thought of the stack of rejection letters in her desk drawer, each one from companies that mysteriously withdrew their job offers once they realized who her father was, every attempt at independence strategically crushed before it could take root. Back in her suite of rooms, Madison's gaze fell on the photo by her bed. Her mother in a simple sundress, laughing as she pushed a young Madison on a park swing. No designer labels, no corporate strategies, just pure joy. When was the last time she'd felt anything close to that freedom? The decision crystallized with surprising clarity. She changed into her plainest clothes, which were still far from plain, and stuffed a backpack with essentials. Her platinum credit cards and phone would be too easily traced, but she had been quietly withdrawing cash for months, preparing for a moment she hadn't known was coming until now. The irony wasn't lost on her, as she used the security protocols her father had drilled into her to evade those same security measures. Down the service elevator, through the staff entrance, past cameras she knew were monitored by guards who had watched her grow up. Each step felt like awakening from a decades-long dream. The rain hit her face as she stepped onto the street, and for the first time in her life, Madison Williams smiled. At the feeling of her perfect makeup running, somewhere between the penthouses and private jets, she had lost herself. It was time to find out who she really was, away from the Williams name and all it represented. She walked until her designer shoes pinched, then walked some more, leaving the glittering skyscrapers behind. When headlights approached on the rain-slicked highway, she stuck out her thumb, remembering a movie scene where someone did the same. Freedom, she was learning, felt a lot like fear and exhilaration mixed together. The rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers filled the silence as Jack's truck pushed through the rain. He'd offered the mysterious woman his son's jacket, the spare one they kept in the truck, and she'd wrapped herself in it with surprising gratitude, as if she'd never worn something so ordinary before. "I'm Jack," he offered, eyes on the road, "and this is Tommy." "Hi!" Tommy chirped from the back seat, where he'd insisted on sitting to give the lady space. "Are you running away from bad guys? Dad says we shouldn't watch too many movies, but you look like someone in a movie running away from bad guys." "Tommy," Jack warned, but he caught the woman's slight smile in his peripheral vision. "I'm Mary," she said after a slight hesitation, "and no bad guys, just needed a change of scenery." The truck hit a pothole, and she grabbed the dashboard with manicured hands that seemed at odds with her simple clothes. Jack noticed she held herself stiffly, like someone at a formal dinner, rather than in a beat-up pickup. "Dad says changes are good sometimes," Tommy offered wisely. "Like when we had to change schools after Mum went to heaven, but then I met my best friend Kevin at the new school, so it was okay." Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Tommy's openness about Sarah always caught him off guard, the way children could speak of devastation with such simple acceptance. "I'm sorry about your mum," Madison said softly, and something in her voice made Jack glance over. The sadness in her eyes seemed too personal to be mere sympathy. "She's still watching us," Tommy declared confidently. "She sends us signs sometimes, like when Dad's having a really hard day, and suddenly we find money in the dryer or get extra. Food at the diner." Jack cleared his throat. "Buddy, remember what we said about inside stories?" "Sorry." Tommy grinned, not looking sorry at all. "Want to see my inhaler? It's blue, which is cool, but Dad gets really worried when I have to use it." "Tommy, I'm sure Mary doesn't—" "I'd love to see it," she interrupted, turning in her seat, to give Tommy her full attention. The genuine interest in her voice surprised Jack. Most people just humored Tommy's chatter. As Tommy launched into a detailed explanation of how inhalers worked, Jack observed their passenger in quick glances. There was something almost regal in her posture, a refinement that seemed at odds with hitchhiking on a rainy highway. But when she laughed at Tommy's jokes, it transformed her entire face, making her seem younger, more real somehow. "Are you hungry?" Jack found himself asking as they passed a sign for Earl's Diner. "I know the owner. Best pie in 3 counties. She paused, as if hunger were a foreign concept that required consideration. "Yes, actually. I am hungry." "Dad makes the hamburgers there," Tommy announced proudly. "He's the best cook, even, though he burns pancakes sometimes. But don't tell Earl that Dad's better. It's another inside story." For the first time, Jack saw their passenger Mary truly laugh, the sound bright and surprised, as if it had escaped without permission. It changed her whole demeanor, and suddenly she seemed less like a polished stranger and more like someone real. "Your secret's safe with me," she promised Tommy, and Jack caught her eye in the rearview mirror. For a moment something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or a question neither was ready to ask. "Earl's it is," Jack decided, flipping on his turn signal. "But Tommy, remember, no running. Use my inhaler if needed, and chocolate. Milk only if I finish my dinner," Tommy recited. "Dad, you need some new rules. These are getting boring." Mary's laughter joined Tommy's, and Jack found himself smiling, despite the weight of the bills in his pocket and the uncertainty of helping a stranger. Some changes, as Tommy had said, could be good sometimes. The diner's neon sign cut through. The rain ahead, a beacon of warmth against the growing dark. None of them could have known it then, but that simple turn signal was directing them toward much more than just dinner. Some moments change everything. You just don't recognize them, until long after they've passed. Earl's Diner looked like it had been plucked straight from a vintage postcard. Red vinyl booths, worn smooth by decades of customers, chrome fixtures that had long ago lost their shine, and a counter where regulars perched on swiveling stools. For Madison, who had dined at Michelin-starred restaurants across Europe, it was like stepping into another world entirely. "Earl, my favorite customer!" A waitress with grey-streaked hair pulled back in a messy bun swooped down on Tommy, ruffling his hair. "And Jack, honey, you're not supposed to be here on your night off." "Just stopping for dinner." "Rita," Jack smiled. "This is Mary. She got caught in the rain, so we offered her a ride." Madison noticed how he hesitated over her false name, but said nothing. Rita's warm smile enveloped her, so different from the practiced politeness of household staff. "Well, any friend of the Parkers is family here. Grab that corner booth. It's Tommy's favorite." As they slid into the booth, Madison found herself wedged between the window and Tommy, who immediately began folding his paper placemat into what he claimed would be the best paper airplane ever. "Here's how you do the wings," he explained, small fingers creasing the paper with intense concentration. "Mom taught Dad, and Dad taught me, and now I'm teaching you. That's how family stuff works." Madison watched, fascinated, as the simple sheet of paper transformed under Tommy's guidance. When was the last time she'd made something with her own hands? Even her paintings at school had been done under the watchful eye of a private art tutor. Each stroke critiqued and corrected. "Order whatever you'd like," Jack offered, then quickly added, "My treat. I get an employee discount." Before she could respond, Rita returned with 3 glasses of water and a knowing smile. "Let me guess. Tommy wants his usual burger, no pickles, extra cheese, chocolate milk after he finishes his dinner." "Jack, you'll have the meatloaf special because it's Tuesday and you're predictable. And for the lady." Madison stared at the laminated menu, overwhelmed by its simplicity. No wine pairings, no seasonal tasting menus, just straightforward comfort food with prices that would barely cover the tip at her usual restaurants. What would you recommend?" "The cheeseburger," Tommy, stage whispered. "Dad makes them best, but Earl's are pretty good too." "Cheeseburger it is," Madison decided, earning an approving nod from Tommy. As they waited for their food, a television mounted in the corner caught Madison's attention. Her breath caught. It was a news report about her disappearance. But the sound was muted, and the grainy security footage showing her leaving her father's building was far from the polished corporate photos they usually used. Neither Jack nor Tommy seemed to notice. "Done!" Tommy proclaimed, holding up his paper airplane. "Now you try." Madison took a fresh placemat, following Tommy's instructions with unpracticed hands. Her first attempt was lopsided, earning a giggle. "And from Tommy." "That's okay, my first one was way worse," he consoled her. "Dad, remember my first airplane? It looked more like a squished frog." "Sure did, buddy," Jack chuckled, and Madison caught him watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. When their food arrived, Madison stared at her plate in wonder. The burger was massive, accompanied by a mountain of golden fries that bore no resemblance to the delicate pommes frites she was used to. "You eat it with your hands," Tommy explained helpfully, demonstrating with his own burger. "It's funner that way." "More fun," Jack corrected automatically. "That too." Madison picked up her burger, trying to remember the last time she'd eaten without silverware. The first bite was a revelation, messy, unpretentious, and absolutely delicious. A drop of sauce escaped down her chin, and she laughed, really laughed, as Tommy handed her a napkin with the expertise of a burger-eating veteran. "Good, right?" he asked proudly, as if he'd personally cooked it. "Amazing," she agreed, and meant it. Not just the food, but all of it. The warm diner air heavy with the scent of coffee and grilled onions, the casual conversation flowing around them, the simple joy of making paper airplanes with a child who saw nothing strange about teaching origami to a rain-soaked stranger. The news report about her disappearance played again, but Madison didn't notice. She was too busy learning from Tommy how to dip fries in her milkshake, a combination that would have horrified her father's personal nutritionist, but somehow tasted like freedom. The Parker house sat at the end of a quiet street, its paint peeling and gutters sagging, but surrounded by a yard full of wildflowers that seemed to thrive despite the neglect. Madison noticed Jack's shoulders tense as he pulled into the cracked driveway, probably seeing the imperfections through her eyes. "It's not much, but—" he started. "It's perfect," Madison interrupted, and meant it. Every flaw spoke of real life, of a home that was lived in rather than showcased. Tommy bounded out of the truck, then immediately slowed his pace at his father's warning look. "Want to see my room? I have all my science projects up on the wall, and Dad helped me make a solar system that actually spins." "Actually," Jack cut in gently, "it's pretty late, buddy. Time to get ready for bed." Madison watched Tommy's face fall and found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "I could help get him settled while you rest a bit? You mentioned having an early shift tomorrow." The look Jack gave her was complicated, gratitude warring with the natural suspicion of a parent. "That's kind, but please, Dad." Tommy wheezed slightly, the excitement catching up with his lungs. "Mary makes awesome paper airplanes, and she hasn't seen my constellation map yet." Madison saw Jack's resolve waver at his son's labored breathing. "I could use a shower," he admitted, "and I need to review some bills." "I promise we'll stick to the bedtime routine," Madison offered, surprising herself with how much she wanted this chance to be useful. Inside, the house was modest but meticulously organized, a father's careful arrangement of a world centered around his child. Crayon drawings adorned the fridge, held up by mismatched magnets. A row of medications sat neatly labeled on the kitchen counter, next to a calendar packed with doctor appointments and school events. "This is Mission Control," Tommy announced proudly, leading her to his room. Space-themed wallpaper, obviously applied by amateur hands, covered one wall. Model rockets hung from the ceiling on fishing line, and a detailed chart of the moon's phases had pride of place above a desk cluttered with science books. "Did you make all of these?" Madison asked, genuinely impressed by the hand-drawn star. "Charts. Dad helps," Tommy said, pulling out his pajamas. "Rockets and stars, of course. He's not very good at drawing, but he's really good at looking stuff up and measuring things exactly right. Mom was the artistic one." He said it matter-of-factly, pulling a framed photo from his bedside table. A woman with Tommy's unruly brown hair smiled at the camera, her arms around a younger Jack who looked unburdened in a way the current version didn't. "She was beautiful," Madison said softly. "Yeah," Tommy agreed. "Dad says I have her smile and her stubborn streak. That's when you don't give up on stuff," he explained helpfully. "Like how Dad never gives up on making sure I'm okay, even when he's super tired." Madison helped Tommy organize his backpack for tomorrow, apparently part of the routine, while he chatted about his upcoming science fair project. She could hear the shower running down the hall, and under that, the soft sound of Jack's voice, practicing what seemed to be a job interview speech. "Dad's trying to get a better job at the big factory," Tommy confided as she helped him with his inhaler. "But he's nervous about the interview. He doesn't know I know that part." The simple trust in his voice as he showed her how to check that. He'd taken the right dose, struck something deep in Madison's chest. When was the last time anyone had trusted her with something genuinely important, not just corporate secrets? "All set, astronaut?" she asked, using the nickname she'd heard Jack use earlier. "Almost." Tommy pulled something from under his pillow, a worn book of constellations. "Dad always reads one constellation story. It's part of the routine." Madison settled into the reading chair, surprised to find her voice steady as she began the tale of Perseus and Andromeda. She was even more surprised to realize she was enjoying herself. No performance required, no strategic networking to consider, just the simple act of reading to a child who was slowly drifting to sleep. She didn't notice Jack standing in the doorway until she finished the story. Tommy was nearly asleep, his breathing finally easy. When she looked up, the expression on Jack's face made her heart skip, gratitude mixed with something softer, more dangerous. "You're good with him," he said quietly as they left Tommy's room. He makes it easy, Madison replied, then added without thinking, I could help more, with Tommy, while you're at work or interviews. The words hung between them, both an offer and a request. Madison found herself holding her breath, suddenly desperate to be needed, to be useful in a way that had nothing to do with corporate mergers or social obligations. Jack studied her for a long moment. You're running from something, he said finally. It wasn't a question, not something bad, she assured him quickly. Just something that wasn't right for me. He nodded slowly, and Madison saw the moment. He made his decision. Tommy's usual sitter, Mrs. Henderson, has been having hip problems. It would help to have someone else available, especially with this job interview coming up. But his eyes sharpened. No more running in the rain. If you're going to be around Tommy, I need to know you'll be stable. He's lost enough already. The trust being offered felt monumental. Madison straightened her shoulders, feeling more like herself than she had in years. I promise. Days fell into a rhythm that Madison had never known existed in her world of galas and board meetings. Mornings meant helping Tommy with his inhaler and lunch packing. Afternoons were filled with homework and impromptu science experiments. And evenings brought the comfortable routine of dinner preparation before Jack returned from his endless string of shifts. She learned to do laundry through YouTube tutorials when Jack wasn't around, fighting with the ancient washing machine that seemed to have a personality of its own. Her first attempt turned all of Tommy's white school shirts pink, but his delighted declaration that he now had cosmic nebula shirts made the mistake feel less like a failure and more like an adventure. Mary. Tommy's voice drew her attention. From the dishes she was washing, another skill she'd had to master. Can you help me with my science project? Dad tried last night, but he was too tired to understand the instructions. Madison dried her hands, noting how they'd grown less soft, marked now with small burns from cooking attempts and the stubborn blue stain from helping with Tommy's solar system diorama. They felt more like her hands now than they ever had before. Of course, she smiled, but her heart clenched at the sight of Jack's work schedule pinned to the fridge. 3 jobs, color-coded in neat blocks that left barely any room for sleep. Yet somehow he managed to help with homework, attend parent-teacher meetings, and keep track of Tommy's medical appointments. As she helped Tommy arrange his project materials, her eye caught a piece of paper fallen behind the desk. Her heart stopped when she realized what it was. An eviction notice, final warning. The amount listed made her sick to her stomach, representing what would have been a trivial sum in her previous life. Dad thinks I don't know about the bad letters, Tommy said quietly, following her gaze. He tries to hide them in his jacket, but I saw him crying once when he thought I was asleep. After that I started eating less at dinner, so there'd be more leftovers for his lunch. Madison felt something break inside her chest. Her father's credit card was in her emergency bag, untouched. One swipe would solve everything. But using it would mean being found, being dragged back to that gilded cage, leaving this little family that had somehow become more real to her than anything in her previous life. The evening news droned in the background as they worked on the project, and Madison's breath caught at a familiar voice. Her father was giving a press conference, his composed exterior betraying only the slightest strain around his eyes that most would miss. But she knew him well enough to see his worry. The Williams family asks for privacy during this difficult time, the reporter's voice continued. The reward for information leading to Madison Williams' safe return has been increased to... Madison quickly changed the channel, but not before catching the amount. The sum was obscene, enough to pay for Tommy's medical care for life, to secure their house, to give Jack the freedom to pursue a better job without fear. The weight of her deception pressed down on her like a physical thing. Every morning she checked her phone, switched off and buried in her bag. fighting the urge to call her father to let him know she was safe. But then she'd see Tommy's smile, or catch Jack falling asleep over bills at the kitchen table, and the words would die in her throat. "Mary!" Tommy's voice pulled her back to the present. "Are you okay? You look sad." "I'm fine, sweetheart," she managed, the endearment slipping out naturally now. "Just thinking about your family," he asked with that unnervingly direct perception children sometimes have. "Dad says everyone has stuff they're not ready to talk about yet. But when you are ready, we're pretty good listeners." Madison hugged him, perhaps a bit too tightly, breathing in the scent of childhood, pencil shavings and grape juice and that weird space-themed shampoo he loved. "Thank you," she whispered, to him and to the universe that had led her to this dingy kitchen that felt more like home than any penthouse ever had. Later that night, after Tommy was asleep, she slipped the day's tips from her new waitressing job, her first real job ever, into Jack's jacket pocket. It wasn't much, nothing compared to what she could give them if she revealed her identity, but it was earned by her own hands, and somehow that made it worth more than all the billions in her trust fund. The local grocery store was hardly Whole Foods, but Madison had learned to navigate its fluorescent-lit aisles with growing confidence. She'd just found the last box of Tommy's favorite cereal when a familiar voice froze her in place. "Miss Williams? Madison Williams?" She turned slowly to find Mrs. Cooper, one of her father's board members, staring at her with growing certainty. Of all the places to run into someone from her old life, it had to be in the cereal aisle of a small-town grocery store. "I'm sorry," Madison replied, forcing her voice into a different accent than her usual cultured tones. "You must have me confused with someone else. I'm Mary Parker." Mrs. Cooper frowned, clearly doubting herself now. "Of course, I apologize. It's just, the resemblance is remarkable. You've seen the news, I'm sure." "Mary." Tommy's voice rang out as he rounded the corner, saving her from having to respond. "Dad says we can get ice cream if it's on sale, and—" He broke off in a wheeze. Madison immediately dropped her basket, all thoughts of Mrs. Cooper forgotten as she knelt beside Tommy. "Inhaler," she commanded gently, already reaching for the spare they always carried. The familiar routine of helping him take his medication drew curious looks from other shoppers. "Is he all right?" Mrs. Cooper asked, concern replacing suspicion. "He will be," Madison answered, rubbing Tommy's back as his breathing slowly normalized. "Let's get you home, sweetheart." Later that evening, Jack's neighbor, Ellen, cornered Madison as she was bringing in the laundry. "It's so nice what you're doing for them," the older woman said, eyes sharp with curiosity. "Known the Parkers long?" "Not long," Madison answered carefully, folding Tommy's nebula-stained shirts. "Funny, you seem so familiar, like I've seen your face somewhere." "Mary's." "Been a blessing," Jack's voice cut in as he came around the house. "Tommy, time for homework." The moment passed, but Madison's hands shook as she finished the laundry. These close calls were becoming more frequent, and each one felt like a ticking clock counting down to inevitable discovery. That night, everything came to a head. Tommy's wheeze had gotten progressively worse through dinner, and by bedtime his breathing was labored enough to send panic through both adults. "His lips are turning blue," Madison realized with horror. Jack was already grabbing car keys. "We need the ER, now!" The drive to the hospital was tense, filled with the sound of Tommy's struggling breaths and Jack's quiet reassurances. Madison sat in the back with Tommy, helping him sit upright, fighting her own rising terror. "Insurance card," Jack muttered as they parked, patting his pockets with shaking hands. "I can't find—" "Just get him inside," Madison ordered. "I'll handle the paperwork." She watched Jack carry Tommy through the emergency room doors before pulling out her phone for the first time in weeks. One call to her father's private banker would cover any medical expense, but it would also instantly reveal her location. The choice should have been impossible, but watching Tommy's small form disappear into the hospital made it the easiest decision she'd ever made. Her finger hovered over the power button when Jack reappeared. They're taking him back now, but the admission nurse, the insurance is expired. I thought we had another month. Madison straightened her spine. Give me 5 minutes. At the admission desk, she drew herself up into the bearing that had been drilled into her since childhood. There seems to be an insurance issue with Tommy Parker, she stated in her most authoritative voice. I'm handling his admission. Ma'am, without proper insurance. Madison pulled out the emergency credit card she'd never planned to use. This should cover any treatment he needs, and I expect absolute discretion about the payment method. The nurse's eyes widened at the black card, but professionally said nothing beyond, "Of course, ma'am." When she returned to the waiting room, Jack was pacing, running his hands through his hair. How did you? I had some savings, she lied. Please, Jack, let me do this. He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the battle between pride and paternal love play out on his face. Finally, he nodded once, gruffly. I'll pay you back. You don't owe me anything, she whispered, and meant it more than he could know. What was money compared to the home they'd given her, the first real family she'd known since her mother died? Hours later, as they watched Tommy sleep peacefully in his hospital bed, oxygen levels finally stable, Jack turned to her. Thank you, he said simply, but his eyes held questions she wasn't ready to answer. The hospital TV droned quietly in the background, and Madison's heart stopped when she saw her own face appear on the screen. But Jack was focused entirely on Tommy, missing the news report about the missing heiress whose face looked remarkably like the woman standing in his son's hospital room. After Tommy's hospital stay, something shifted in the Parker household. The late-night kitchen became their unofficial meeting place, where Jack and Madison would find themselves gravitating after Tommy was asleep, sharing cups of coffee and pieces of themselves in the gentle quiet. He's breathing better tonight, Madison said, sliding a mug across the worn kitchen table to Jack. She'd learned how he took his coffee, black, with just a hint of sugar, just as she'd learned the subtle signs of worry in his shoulders when he checked on Tommy. Yeah, Jack agreed, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. The new medication helps. I just wish... He trailed off, but Madison heard the unspoken words. Wishes wouldn't pay for the prescriptions that were now sitting on the counter. There, cost hanging over the household like a shadow. You're doing everything you can, she said softly. Tommy knows that. He's proud of you. Jack looked up, meeting her eyes. He's proud of us, he corrected quietly. He told his teacher that you helped him get an A on his science project. Called you his... Well, never mind. Madison's heart squeezed. What did he call me? Jack studied his coffee intently. His bonus mom. Said it was better than a stepmom because we're not... You know, but you still take care of him like one. The silence that followed felt charged with everything unsaid. Madison thought of all the lies between them, of her real identity waiting to shatter this fragile, precious thing they'd built. Tell me about Sarah, she found herself asking. Tommy says she loved the stars. A soft smile touched Jack's lips. She did. Used to drag us camping just to look at them properly, no city lights. Said everyone should see the Milky Way at least once in their life. He glanced at Madison. What about you? Any family looking for you? Madison's hands tightened around her mug. My mother died when I was young. My father. He loves me, but he wants to control every aspect of my life. Who I am, who I'll become, who I'll... She stopped, remembering the arranged marriage that had sparked her escape. Who you'll love. Jack finished quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and Madison felt her breath catch. In the soft kitchen light, Jack looked younger, the worry lines easing from his face. Without thinking, she reached across the table to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. The moment her fingers touched his skin, something electric passed between them. Jack caught her hand before she could pull it back, his thumb brushing across her knuckles with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "Mary," he started, then stopped, struggling with words. "I know you have secrets. I know there's more to your story than you're telling me. But these past weeks, watching you with Tommy, seeing how you fit into our lives, I haven't felt this way since—" "Dad?" Tommy's sleepy voice from the doorway made them both jump, their hands separating quickly. "I had a dream about Mom." Jack was on his feet instantly, parental concern replacing everything else. "You okay, buddy?" "Uh-huh." She was showing Mary how to make her special hot chocolate, the one with extra marshmallows. Tommy rubbed his eyes, looking between them. "Can we make some, please?" Madison stood grateful for the distraction. "I think that's a midnight snack worth staying up for. Want to teach me the recipe?" As they moved around the kitchen, Jack warming milk, while Tommy solemnly counted marshmallows and Madison measured cocoa powder. She felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. This was what family felt like. Not corporate dynasties or arranged marriages, but small moments of joy shared in a too-small kitchen at midnight. Later, after Tommy had fallen asleep on the couch and they'd carried him back to bed, Jack and Madison found themselves alone again in the hallway. "Mary," Jack said softly, and the false name had never hurt more to hear. "Whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone anymore." Madison felt tears prick at her eyes. "Jack, there's something I need to tell you." The sudden blare of a car alarm outside made them both jump. Through the window, Madison caught a glimpse of a black SUV cruising slowly past the house, the same type her father's security team used. Her confession died in her throat. "Nothing," she said quickly, taking a step back. "It's nothing. Good night, Jack." She fled to her room before he could respond, before she could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes. Alone in the dark, Madison pressed her hands to her mouth to stifle a sob. She was falling in love with a man who didn't even know her real name, and sooner or later, that truth would destroy everything. The storm hit without warning, the kind of summer tempest that turns day into night. Thunder rattled the windows of the Parker house as Madison helped Tommy gather emergency supplies, flashlights, batteries, and his backup inhaler, just in case. "Dad, we should be home by now," Tommy worried, pressing his face against the window. The diner where Jack worked was only 15 minutes away, but the rain had turned the streets into shallow rivers. As if summoned by his son's concern, they heard Jack's truck in the driveway. He burst through the door moments later, soaked to the bone. "Power's out all over town," he reported, shaking water from his hair. "Earl closed early before it got worse." A tremendous crack of thunder made them all jump, and the house plunged into darkness as the power failed. Tommy's sharp intake of breath had both adults moving instantly, Jack fishing out his phone's flashlight while Madison grabbed Tommy's hand. "Perfect timing for a blanket fort," Madison suggested, her voice deliberately light. "Remember how you said you wanted to teach me to build one?" Tommy's grip on her hand relaxed slightly. "Can we use the couch cushions?" "Of course we can, astronaut," Jack answered, already moving furniture. "Best structural support in the house." They worked together by flashlight and thunder glare, transforming the living room into a cozy shelter. Jack's construction experience and Tommy's precise scientific instructions combined with Madison's creative touch to create something magical. "Now it's perfect for stargazing," Tommy declared as they lay back on pillows, his LED star projector casting constellations onto their makeshift ceiling. The storm's fury seemed distant now, transformed into background ambience for their sanctuary. "Tell us about the stars, buddy," Jack encouraged, and Madison heard the gratitude in his voice for the distraction, for Tommy's steady breathing, for this moment of peace. "Well, that's Cassiopeia," Tommy pointed. She was a queen who thought she was prettier than the gods, which was pretty silly of her. And over there is Perseus, who saved Andromeda with help from Pegasus, the flying horse. Madison watched Jack watching his son, saw the love and pride painted across his features in the soft light. When had this become her definition of beauty? Not the glittering ballrooms and designer gowns of her past, but a father and son sharing. Stories in a blanket fort while rain lashed the windows. Tommy's voice grew sleepy as he continued his astronomical tour. And that's Cygnus, the swan. Mum always said it was her favorite because it looked like it was flying home. The word home hung in the air as Tommy drifted off to sleep between them, his breathing deep and untroubled. For a long moment neither adult spoke, afraid to break the spell of this peaceful moment. "You know," Jack finally whispered, "sometimes when he looks at you I see Sarah in his eyes. That same way of finding magic in ordinary things." Madison's heart clenched. "Jack, I know. You have your secrets, your past, but Mary—" He reached across Tommy's sleeping form, his fingers brushing her cheek. "When I'm with you, I feel like I'm finding magic in ordinary things too." The storm chose that moment to unleash its loudest thunderclap yet, and Tommy stirred between them. "Mom," he mumbled, still half asleep, "you came back." Madison felt tears spring to her eyes as Tommy snuggled closer to her, his small hand finding hers in the dark. She looked at Jack helplessly, expecting to see pain at this confusion, this replacement. Instead, his eyes held understanding, and something deeper that made her breath catch. Slowly, carefully, he shifted closer, maintaining the protective circle around Tommy while bringing himself near enough that Madison could feel the warmth of him, smell the lingering rain on his skin. "Maybe," he whispered so softly she almost missed it, "some people come into our lives not to replace what we've lost, but to help us find what we still need." Madison couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she found Jack's free hand in the dark, twining their fingers together. They lay there, connected by Tommy's peaceful sleep between them, as the storm raged and died outside. In that moment, Madison almost convinced herself that this could last. This family, this love, this belonging. But as Tommy shifted in his sleep, his movement dislodged her phone from her pocket. It skittered across the blankets, its screen flickering to life for just a second, long enough for Jack to see the missed call notification. "Dad, 36 missed calls." Long enough for him to see the name at the top of the screen, Madison Williams. Jack's hand withdrew from Madison's as if burned, his eyes fixed on the phone's now dark screen. The only sound was Tommy's peaceful breathing and the fading rumble of thunder outside. "Jack," Madison whispered, her voice trembling. "I can explain." "Not here," he cut her off, gesturing to Tommy. His voice was controlled, but she could see the storm brewing in his eyes. "Kitchen. Now." Before either could move, headlights swept across the window, followed by the distinct crunch of multiple vehicles. On gravel, Madison's blood ran cold. She recognized the sound of her father's security convoy. "They're here," she breathed, panic rising in her throat. "Jack, please, you can hate me later, but right now we need to—" "Mr. Parker." A sharp knock at the door interrupted her. "This is Detective Morrison. We need to speak with you regarding—" "A missing person." Jack stood, his movement disturbing Tommy, who blinked awake. "Dad, what's going on?" "Nothing, buddy," Jack managed, but his voice had an edge Tommy had never heard before. "Stay in the fort, okay?" Madison watched Jack walk to the door, her world crumbling with each step. Through the window, she could see the flashing lights of police cars mixing with the unmarked black SUVs she'd dreaded for weeks. Local news vans were already pulling up. Of course they'd want to capture the missing heiress story. "Sir?" she heard the detective say as Jack opened the door. "We have reason to believe Madison Williams is in your home. Her father is very concerned about her safety." Tommy sat up, confused. Mary, why are there police cars? Madison pulled him close, possibly for the last time. Tommy, I need you to know something. Everything I felt for you and your dad, it was all real. That's the most important thing to remember, okay? Miss Williams, a familiar voice called from the doorway. Harrison, her father's head of security, stepped into view. Your father's been very worried, Mary. Tommy's voice cracked as he looked between them. What are they calling you that? Jack stood rigid in the doorway, his back to the room. Madison could see the tension in every line of his body as he listened to the detective explain the situation, how the billionaire's daughter had run away, how she'd been hiding in his home, how her father had offered a reward that could change their lives. The money, Madison said suddenly, desperately. Jack, the hospital bills, Tommy's medication, that's why I couldn't tell you. I knew you'd never accept help if you knew who I was. He turned then, and the betrayal in his eyes hit her like a physical blow. You're right. I wouldn't have. Because I've spent Tommy's entire life teaching him that honesty matters more than money. That character is worth more than comfort. His laugh was bitter. Guess I'm the fool who fell for his own lessons. Daddy. Tommy's voice was small, frightened. His breathing was starting to wheeze. The sound snapped both adults back to what mattered most. Jack moved instantly, reaching for Tommy's inhaler, while Madison rubbed his back. Their practiced teamwork automatic even now. Mr. Parker, Harrison said quietly, if you step aside, we can resolve this situation quickly. Mr. Williams is prepared to be generous. In exchange for discretion, Madison saw the muscle jump in Jack's jaw. Tommy, he said carefully, go to your room, buddy. Take your inhaler. But Dad, now, son. Tommy looked at Madison one last time, tears in his eyes, before running from the room. The sound of his door slamming echoed through the house. Jack, Madison tried one more time. Everything I told you about wanting a real life, about feeling trapped, it was all true. Meeting you and Tommy, it showed me what really matters. What matters, Jack replied quietly, is that my son cried himself to sleep for months after his mother died, that he finally started to trust someone again, to open his heart. And you, he shook his head, you made fools of us both. Miss Williams, Harrison prompted. Your father's waiting. Madison stood slowly, her legs shaking. Through the window, she could see her father's familiar silhouette stepping out of his car, camera flashes illuminating him like lightning. The storm outside had passed, but the one in her heart was just beginning. I'm sorry, she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to Jack, to Tommy, or to herself. I never meant to fall in love. She walked past Jack, noting how he stepped back to avoid touching her and into the waiting arms of her old life. Behind her, she heard Tommy's door open, heard his running footsteps. Mary, don't go, please. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. Because if she saw Tommy's face, saw Jack holding him back, she'd never find the strength to leave. And somehow she knew that staying would only bring more pain to the family she'd grown to love. Madison spent 3 days in her old penthouse suite, surrounded by luxury that now felt suffocating. Her father had arranged a press conference where she dutifully explained her adventure as a soul-searching journey, carefully crafted to protect both the Williams' reputation and the Parkers' privacy. But her thoughts remained in that small house with its blanket forts and paper airplanes. The call came at 2 a.m. Madison. Jack's voice was rough, desperate, in a way that made her sit bolt upright. It's Tommy. They're taking him to St. Mary's. His breathing. I can't. She was moving before he finished speaking, bare feet silent on marble floors. I'm coming. Jack, I'm coming right now. The insurance is still processing, he continued as if he hadn't heard her. They're saying without proof of coverage. Listen. To me, she cut in, already pulling on clothes. Get him to the hospital. I'll handle everything else. Just keep him breathing. Her father's security team was changing shifts. She knew the schedule by heart now. It took less than 2 minutes to slip past them, muscle memory from her first escape guiding her to the service elevator. This time, though, she took her phone, her credit cards, her ID, no more hiding. The hospital was 30 minutes away by cab. She made it in 15, throwing enough cash at the driver to cover any potential tickets. The emergency room was chaos. A car accident had brought in multiple trauma patients, leaving the staff stretched thin. She found Jack pacing in a crowded waiting room, looking like he'd aged years in days. Tommy's wheezing was audible from across the room. Insurance verification required before, a harried nurse was saying. Madison stepped forward, channeling every ounce of her father's boardroom authority. "I'm Madison Williams. Yes, that Madison Williams. This child needs treatment now." The nurse's eyes widened with recognition. The press conference had been on every channel. "Miss Williams, call my father's office if you need verification, but this child gets treated now." She pulled out her black card. "I'll cover any and all expenses." Things moved quickly after that. Tommy was rushed into treatment, an army of medical professionals descending with nebulizers and medication. Madison watched through the treatment room window as his desperate gasps for air gradually eased. "You didn't have to come." Jack's voice was quiet beside her. "Yes, I did." She kept her eyes on Tommy. "I love him. That wasn't a lie." And the rest. My name, my background. Yes, I lied about those. But everything else. She finally turned to face him. "How I felt doing Tommy's science projects, having dinner with you both, building that ridiculous blanket fort. That was the most honest I've ever been in my life." A doctor approached before. Jack could respond. "Mr. Parker, we'd like to keep Tommy overnight for observation. His oxygen levels are still lower than we'd like." "Of course, whatever he needs," Jack started, then hesitated. "It's covered," Madison said firmly. "All of it. And before you argue about pride or independence or teaching Tommy about honest work, this isn't about money. This is about me refusing to let someone I love suffer when I can help." "Ms. Williams," the doctor interjected carefully, "given Tommy's history and these recent severe attacks, I'd strongly recommend seeing a specialist. There's a new treatment protocol that could—" "Book it," Madison said immediately. "Whatever he needs. You can't just—" Jack started. "Yes, I can." She turned to face him fully. "You can hate me. You can never forgive me for lying. But don't punish Tommy by refusing help that could let him run and play and breathe like other kids. Please, Jack." Tommy stirred in the hospital bed, his eyes fluttering open. "Mary," he called weakly. Madison looked at Jack, asking permission with her eyes. After an eternal moment, he nodded once. She was at Tommy's side in an instant, taking his small hand. "I'm here, astronaut. I'm here." "You came back," he whispered, managing a weak smile. "Dad said, when people really love you, they always come back." Madison felt tears spill down her cheeks as she looked up at Jack, who stood in the doorway with an unreadable expression. "Sometimes," she said softly, "they never really leave at all." The hospital corridor at 3 a.m. was eerily quiet, broken only by the soft beeping of monitors from Tommy's room. Madison sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, watching his chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep, when she sensed Jack's presence. "Behind her. We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here." She followed him to the hospital's empty cafeteria, the fluorescent lights harsh against their exhausted faces. Richard Williams stood as they entered, and Madison felt her spine stiffen. "Daddy, please, not now." On the contrary, her father's voice was clipped. "This is exactly the time, while you're remembering exactly what your adventure has cost. This family cost." Madison's laugh was bitter. "What it cost was showing me what a real family looks like, one that isn't measured in stock options and merger deals." "A real family?" Richard gestured toward Jack. You mean the man you deceived? The child you let believe you were someone else? Tell me, Madison, how is that more real than anything I've given you? Because they loved me for who I am, not what I'm worth. The words echoed in the empty cafeteria. They didn't even know who. You are. Jack's quiet voice cut through her defense like a knife. Madison turned to him, desperate to explain. Jack, please. Yes, I lied about my name, about my background, but everything else, every moment with Tommy, every late-night conversation with you, every feeling, that was real. Was it? Jack ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion and hurt warring in his expression. Because from where I'm standing, you played house with us, got to experience how the other half lives, like some kind of social experiment. Then you paid for Tommy's medical care to, what, ease your conscience? That's not fair, Madison whispered. Fair? Jack's control finally broke. Fair would have been telling me the truth from the beginning. Fair would have been not letting my son fall in love with someone who was just passing through. Fair would have been... Enough. Richard's commanding tone silenced them both. Madison, the car is waiting. It's time to end this, whatever this is. Mr. Parker, I assume we can reach an arrangement about discretion. I don't want your money. Jack's voice was ice. Everyone wants money, Richard dismissed. The question is just the price. Name it. For yourself, for the boy's medical care, for... Get out! Jack's words were quiet but carried such force that even Richard Williams paused. Both of you. Tommy's finally sleeping, and I need to be there when he wakes up. He's lost enough mother. Figures for one lifetime. The words hit Madison like physical blows. Jack, please. I know I hurt you, but Tommy will learn what I learned. Jack cut her off. That sometimes people we love leave, and that all the money in the world can't fix a broken trust. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Parker, Tommy's asking for you. Jack turned without another word, leaving Madison standing between her father and the life she'd found, the life she'd lost. The jet is ready, Richard said softly. The merger with Sterling Industries is still salvageable if we act quickly. Charles's son is willing to overlook this incident. Madison stared at her father, really seeing him for the first time. Is that all you think I'm worth? A merger deal? It's all any of us are worth in the end, he replied. The sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be. Through the cafeteria windows, Madison could see Tommy's room. Jack sat by his bed, probably telling one of their constellation stories. She remembered the blanket fort, the paper airplanes, the simple joy of being loved for herself. Not her name, not her fortune, just her. No, she said softly. Madison, I said no. She straightened her spine, channeling every lesson in authority he'd ever taught her. I'm not going back, not to the penthouse, not to the merger, not to being a corporate asset instead of a daughter. Don't be naive, Richard snapped. What exactly do you think you'll do? That man won't even look at you. The child will forget you. You have nothing. I have myself. Madison cut him off. For the first time in my life, I know who that is, and she's not the person you tried to make me. She walked out of the cafeteria, her father's calls falling silent behind her. But instead of following Jack to Tommy's room, she made herself walk past it, past the nurse's station, past the sliding doors into the cold night air. Sometimes love meant knowing when to walk away, even if it shattered your heart in the process. The Parker house felt different now. Empty spaces Madison hadn't even realized she'd filled echoed with absence. The coffee mug she'd claimed as her favorite, the reading chair where she'd told constellation stories, the spot at the dinner table where she'd struggled to learn how to fold napkins properly. Tommy noticed them all. She color-coded my science folders, he said one morning, staring at his backpack. She said it would help me stay organized like real scientists do. Jack kept folding laundry, trying to ignore how the pink-stained shirts still held traces of that first laundry disaster. I can help you organize them a different way, buddy. It's not the same. Tommy's voice was small. Nothing's the same. The truth of those words hit harder than Jack wanted to admit. He'd gotten used to having a partner again, someone to share Tommy's victories and worries with, someone who understood that macaroni art was museum-worthy and that monster checks were a crucial bedtime ritual. The envelope that arrived a week after Madison left nearly broke him. Inside was a cashier's check that would cover their rent for a year, along with a letter authorizing complete coverage of Tommy's medical expenses at any facility they chose. No strings attached, no publicity, no mention of Madison at all. Just help they desperately needed from an anonymous donor, his pride warred with his love for his son. In the end, Tommy's breathing won out over his ego. Across town, in her newly rented apartment, modest by Williams standards, but still more luxurious than she needed, Madison was discovering that independence felt a lot like loneliness. "The board is concerned," her father's voice crackled through her phone. "Your trust fund is mine," she interrupted, watching rain trail down her window. "You made that legally binding on my 25th birthday. I'm not touching the company shares. I'm not interfering with the merger. I'm just living my life. In a 2-bedroom apartment working at a children's hospital as a volunteer. This isn't living, Madison. This is rebellion." She thought of Tommy's face lighting up when he mastered a new concept, of Jack's quiet strength as he juggled 3 jobs and endless medical bills. "No, Daddy. For the first time, this is actually living." The children's ward where she volunteered became her sanctuary. Here, she could use her skills, the organizational efficiency drilled into her since childhood, the ability to navigate complex medical systems, the patience learned from helping Tommy with his homework, to make a real difference. "Miss Madison," little Sarah called from her bed, "will you tell me a constellation story?" Madison's heart clenched, remembering another child who loved the stars. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you know about Cassiopeia, the queen who learned that true beauty isn't about how you look?" She saw Tommy sometimes, during his specialist appointments that she'd arranged, but never attended. From around corners and through doorways, she watched him grow stronger, his breathing easier with the new treatment protocol. She saw Jack too, the worry lines in his face softening as Tommy's health improved. The hardest part was the small package that arrived at her apartment one day. Inside was a carefully folded paper airplane, slightly crushed but lovingly made. The note attached read simply, "Tommy wanted you to have this. He said real scientists never stop learning new things." That night, Madison sat in her empty apartment, holding the paper airplane and finally letting herself cry for everything she'd gained and lost. Her phone lit up with another call from her father, probably about the merger she'd derailed by refusing to marry Charles Sterling's son. Instead of answering, she opened her laptop and began typing, "Dear Tommy, real scientists also never stop asking questions, like can love be measured in moments instead of months? Can a family be built on truth even if it started with a lie? Can someone find themselves by pretending to be someone else? I'm still looking for the answers. But I wanted you to know that the most real thing in my life was being your Mary." She never sent the letter. Some things she was learning had to remain in the heart rather than on paper. But she kept the airplane on her windowsill, a reminder that sometimes the richest moments in life come disguised as ordinary ones, like teaching a child to fold paper into wings, or falling in love over late-night coffee in a worn-out kitchen, or learning that home isn't always where you're born, but where you find yourself. The revelation came to Jack in the most ordinary of moments. He was watching Tommy demonstrate his science fair project, a working model of the respiratory system that had won first place, when his son's words stopped him cold. "And see, Dad, the airways get smaller here, just like mine do during an attack. but Mary taught me that understanding how something works helps make it less scary. Now, when I feel an attack coming, I just picture this model and remember I can control it." Jack stared at his son, really seeing him for the first time in weeks. Tommy's breathing was stronger, his confidence higher. The dark circles that had haunted Jack's own reflection were fading, the crushing weight of medical bills lifted by that anonymous donation he knew wasn't really anonymous at all. Across town, Madison sat in a board meeting at the Children's Hospital, where she volunteered. The director was discussing budget cuts to the respiratory therapy program. Unfortunately, without additional funding, "I'll fund it," Madison heard herself say. The board members turned to stare at her, the mysterious Ms. Williams who worked for free and never talked about her past, the entire program. The director asked carefully. Yes, Madison sat straighter. "But with conditions. The program needs to be accessible to all families regardless of insurance status. And I want to establish a support system for single parents managing chronic conditions." Later that evening, Richard Williams watched his daughter present her proposal for restructuring the Williams Foundation's charitable giving. Gone were the splashy galas and photo ops, replaced by targeted programs addressing real needs she'd witnessed firsthand. "You've changed," he said quietly, after the other board members left. "I grew up," Madison corrected. "There's a difference. Because of that mechanic and his son? Because they showed me what real value looks like." Madison met her father's eyes. "It's not about net worth, Dad. It's about being worth something to others." Richard was silent for a long moment, studying the daughter he'd tried so hard to protect and control. "Your mother would be proud," he finally said. "She always said I focused too much on building an empire and not enough on building a life." The words hung between them, decades of misunderstanding finally starting to crack. At Earl's Diner, Tommy tugged on Jack's sleeve during their weekly dinner out. "Dad, remember when Mom used to say that sometimes the bravest thing is admitting you were wrong?" Jack set down his coffee. "Yeah, buddy, I remember." "Well," Tommy fidgeted with his napkin, folded exactly the way Madison had taught him. "Maybe sometimes the smartest thing is admitting when someone else was right, even if they didn't do everything right." Out of the mouths of babes, Jack thought, remembering all the times he'd preached forgiveness and understanding to his son. How many times had he said that actions spoke louder than words, that love was shown through choices, not promises? Madison's choices since leaving spoke volumes. No attempts to publicize her help, no leverage of Tommy's story for corporate PR, just quiet support and a steady dismantling of every barrier to his care. The TV over the diner counter caught his attention. Madison was announcing a new Williams Foundation initiative focused on pediatric respiratory care. She looked different now, somehow both more polished and more real than the woman who'd folded paper airplanes in his kitchen. Her words about accessibility and family support hit close. To home. "She's still helping kids breathe better," Tommy observed, "just like she helped me." Jack watched his son, healthy, happy and wise beyond his years, and felt something shift in his chest. Maybe, he realized, love wasn't about perfect honesty from the start. Maybe it was about becoming honest, about growing into the person, worthy of the love you'd found. "Hey, Dad?" Tommy's voice pulled him back to the present. "Did you know that stars have to explode before they can turn into something new? Mary told me that once. She said sometimes beautiful things have to break apart before they can become what they're meant to be." Madison was reviewing funding proposals in her new office at the Children's Hospital when a familiar voice made her heart stop. The receptionist said, "I'd find you here." She looked up to find Jack standing in her doorway, somehow both exactly, as she remembered, and completely different. The worry lines around his eyes had softened, but there was a new weight to his presence, a certainty that hadn't been there before. "Jack," she managed. "Is Tommy okay?" "He's great, actually." Jack stepped into the office, taking in the star charts on her walls, the paper airplane still perched on her windowsill. "His breathing's better than it's ever been. The specialist you found, she's amazing." "I'm glad," Madison said softly. "But I'm guessing you didn't come here to tell me that." "No." Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it hurt. "I came because my 8-year-old son is wiser than I am. He helped me understand something important." Madison waited, hardly daring to breathe. "You lied about your name," Jack continued, "about your background, but you never lied about loving us. Everything you've done since leaving proves that." "I couldn't just stop caring," Madison whispered. "It doesn't work like that." "I know. That's what Tommy kept trying to tell me." Jack finally met her eyes. He said real love is about choices, not circumstances, that you chose us even when it meant giving up everything you knew, and that maybe I was so focused on the lie that started it all, I couldn't see the truth it led to. Madison felt tears threatening. "And what truth is that?" "That sometimes the realest things in life start with pretending." Jack took a step closer. "You pretended to be Mary because you wanted a normal life. I pretended I could handle everything, alone because I was afraid to need someone again. But somewhere along the way, we stopped pretending." "Jack, let me finish," he said gently. "I was angry that you lied about who you were, but these past months, watching you transform your foundation, seeing how you've helped families like ours without taking any credit, I realized something. Mary wasn't a lie. She was who you were always meant to be. You just needed the freedom to become her." Madison stood, her legs shaking. "I never meant to hurt you or Tommy. The longer I stayed, the more real it felt, and the harder it became to risk losing it by telling the truth. I understand that now." Jack's voice was soft. "And I understand something else too. The woman who helped my son breathe easier, who taught him about stars and science, who made him laugh again, that woman wasn't Madison Williams or Mary Parker. That was just you. And that's who we fell in love with." The tears were falling, freely now. "I missed you both so much." "We missed you too." Jack closed the distance between them. "Tommy keeps setting a place for you at dinner. Says real family doesn't stop being family just because they're not there. He's definitely wiser than both of us." Madison managed a watery laugh. "He gets that from his mother." Jack smiled, then grew serious. "Both of them." The word hung between. In them, an acknowledgement, an offering, a possible future. "I can't go back to pretending," Madison said quietly. "I'm not just Mary anymore." "No," Jack agreed. "You're more. You're the woman who taught my son that breathing isn't just about air. It's about having the courage to be yourself. You're the person who showed me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real." He reached for her hand. "And if you're willing, you're someone we'd like to get to know. All of you this time." Madison stared at their joined hands. "Even with all the complications, the media attention, my father? Hey, if Tommy can handle complex respiratory system models, I figure we can handle a few paparazzi." His smile turned tender. "Besides, I have it on good authority that the best views of the stars come after the storms pass." "Speaking of stars," Madison squeezed his hand. "There's a meteor shower tonight. Tommy wouldn't want to miss that, would he?" "No," Jack pulled her closer. "No, he wouldn't, and neither would we." Richard Williams had faced down corporate raiders, hostile takeovers and board rebellions, but nothing had prepared him for sitting in Earl's diner, watching his daughter teach an 8-year-old boy how to properly align a paper airplane's wings for maximum flight distance. "The angle has to be exact," Madison was explaining to Tommy, her designer dress incongruous against the vinyl booth. "Just like plotting stock market trajectories, actually." "Really?" Tommy's eyes lit up. Can you teach me about stocks too? Dad says I should learn about money stuff early. Richard caught Jack's eye across the table, seeing his own surprise mirrored there. Here was his daughter, whom he'd spent years grooming for corporate leadership, using those same lessons to connect with a child over paper airplanes. Your daughter, Richard said quietly to Jack, has quite effectively reorganized my entire and corporate philanthropy structure, rather like someone else I once knew who had a habit of changing everything she touched. Mom was good at that. Madison smiled, remembering. She always said the best investments were in people, not portfolios. She was right. Richard watched Tommy carefully fold another plane. I forgot that somewhere along the way, started measuring success in stock prices instead of smiles. Jack cleared his throat. Sir, about the medical coverage is non-negotiable, Richard cut in. Consider it back payment for teaching my daughter what I couldn't, that true worth isn't measured in net worth. The tension that had haunted their previous meetings began to ease. Tommy, oblivious to the adults' complex dynamics, launched into an explanation of his latest science project, a study of air pressure and flight dynamics inspired by his breathing treatments. Grandpa Richard, he asked suddenly, making the older man's coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips, since you know about business stuff, could you help me with the budget part? Madison says all good projects need proper funding proposals. Richard. Williams, titan of industry, found himself pulling out his Mont Blanc pen to help an 8-year-old calculate the cost of paper airplanes and wind gauges. Jack watched, amazed, as the man who'd once tried to buy his silence now earnestly discussed the importance of detailed expense tracking with his son. He's different with Tommy, Madison murmured, sliding into the booth beside Jack. More like the father I remember from before Mom died. When he still knew how to play. Tommy has that effect on people, Jack smiled, makes them remember what matters. The diner's bell chimed as Rita brought their orders. Cheeseburgers all around, even for Richard Williams in his 3-piece suit. She didn't bat an eye at the unusual group. A billionaire, his corporate warrior-turned-philanthropist daughter, a mechanic, and a small boy whose paper airplanes were scattered across the table like a bridge between two worlds. You know, Richard said, carefully wiping burger juice from his fingers with a paper napkin, the Williams Foundation has never had a junior advisory board. Tommy's funding proposal shows promise. Tommy's eyes widened. Really? Could I help? Other kids get their medicine too? With proper supervision, Richard nodded gravely. And perhaps joint oversight from your parents. The word hung in the air. Parents, plural. Madison felt Jack's hand find hers under the table. I think, Jack said slowly, that could work. As long as board meetings don't interfere with meteor shower viewing, we have priorities after all. Speaking of priorities, Richard straightened his tie, looking uncharacteristically nervous. The Foundation is hosting a gala next month for the new Children's Respiratory Care Initiative. Nothing formal, just a small gathering. Perhaps, well, Tommy might enjoy seeing how these things work. All of you might. Madison squeezed Jack's hand, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. Her father wasn't just inviting them to an event, he was acknowledging them as family. Will there be space for paper airplanes? Tommy asked seriously. I think, Richard smiled, looking years younger, we could probably clear the ballroom for a test flight or two. Every good business proposal needs a demonstration phase, after all. As they left the diner, Tommy walking between Madison and Jack, while Richard followed with the careful stack of paper airplanes, Madison caught sight of their reflection in the window. It wasn't a perfect family portrait. Her father still looked slightly uncomfortable in such casual surroundings. Jack's work clothes contrasted sharply with their designer wear, and Tommy's excitement had him bouncing instead of walking. But it was real, and that made it better than perfect. 1 year later, Jack's truck once again made its way down the rain-slicked highway where it all began. This time, though, Madison sat beside him openly, her engagement ring catching the light from passing cars. In the back seat, Tommy was explaining constellations to his grandfather, Richard Williams, looking more comfortable in casual clothes than anyone would have thought possible. "Remember this spot?" Jack asked softly, nodding toward a particular stretch of road. "How could I forget?" Madison smiled. "Best wrong turn I ever took." They were headed to Earl's Diner for what had become a monthly tradition. Family dinner where paper airplanes were as welcome as business proposals, and where Tommy's growing collection of science awards shared space with Madison's philanthropy, achievements, and Jack's new garage ownership papers. The Parker Williams Respiratory Care Initiative had transformed the local children's hospital, with Tommy serving as its youngest board advisor. His own breathing had improved so dramatically that he joined the school track team, though he still carried an inhaler decorated with star stickers, just in case. "Look!" Tommy pointed through the rain. "The diner's sign is still broken in. The same place. Some things never change, right?" But some things did change, Madison thought, watching her father help Tommy out of the truck with the easy comfort of practice. Richard Williams now knew how to fold paper airplanes, could quote constellation myths, and had recently been spotted eating diner food without a fork. Inside, Rita greeted them with the same warmth she'd shown when Madison was just Mary, proving that some kinds of love don't care about last names or bank accounts. "To our usual spot?" she asked, already leading them to the corner booth. "Actually," Madison said, "could we sit by the window, where we had our first meal here?" As they settled in, Tommy pulled out his latest creation, a paper airplane designed with computer modeling software Richard had taught him to use. "Mom, Dad, watch this one. Grandpa helped me calculate the aerodynamics." The word "Mom" no longer brought tears to Madison's eyes, though it still filled her heart each time. Jack squeezed her hand under the table, both of them remembering the journey that had brought them here. "Speaking of calculations," Richard cleared his throat, "Tommy's education fund projections are complete. I've taken the liberty of including both undergraduate and graduate programs in aerospace engineering." "Dad," Madison interrupted gently, "he's 9. Maybe we let him decide his own flight path." Richard looked sheepish, then chuckled. "Your mother would have said the same thing. She always did know best." "Both of them did," Tommy said matter-of-factly, launching his airplane across the diner. "My first mom taught Dad about love, and my second mom taught him about forgiveness. That's what he told me." Jack pulled Tommy close, ruffling his hair. "When did you get so smart, buddy?" "Probably around the same time you got smart enough to propose," Tommy grinned, "even if it took you forever." The proposal had been simple. No elaborate gestures or expensive settings. Just a quiet moment in their blanket fort during a power outage, stars projected on the ceiling, paper airplanes scattered around them. The kind of perfect ordinary moment that had brought them together in the first place. Madison watched her family, all of them, the ones she was born to and the ones she'd chosen, and felt a completeness she'd never known possible. Her father was showing Tommy how to adjust his airplane design on a tablet worth more than the diner's monthly revenue, while Jack added his practical knowledge about wind resistance from his years of automotive work. 3 different worlds, blending into something new and wonderful. "Hey," Jack said softly, drawing her attention, "where'd you go just now?" "I was thinking about that night in the rain," she replied. "How lost I felt, how I had no idea that by trying to find myself, I'd find everything else too." "Pretty lucky wrong turn," he smiled. "No." Madison shook her head, watching Tommy launch. Another airplane that soared perfectly across the diner, drawing applause from other customers. "Not luck. Some things are just meant to be, even if they take a winding road to get there." Outside, the rain began to ease, and through a break in the clouds, the first stars of evening became visible. Madison recognized Cassiopeia, the queen, who learned about true beauty and smiled. Some stories do have happy endings, she thought, not because they're perfect, but because they're perfectly right. Ready to head home? Jack asked as Tommy gathered his planes and Richard paid the bill. There, ongoing friendly battle over who would treat each time. Home. Not the penthouse or the mansion, but the modest house with its garden full of wildflowers and its walls full of memories. The home where two kinds of love stories had bloomed. Sarah's and Jack's first chapter, and now their own continuing. Story. Yes, Madison said, taking both Jack's hand and Tommy's. Let's go home. Behind them a paper airplane soared one last time, its path true and strong, just like the love that had given it wings.